On my university graduation day, my father caught my wrist in the crowd, his fingers brushing the bruise hidden by my sleeve. He leaned in, reading the silver thread I'd stitched into the silk lining. Stepmother beat me. He blinked once, then let go as if nothing happened. 3 years later, I became head of compliance at his company. The day of reckoning had finally come. My name is Ivy Calder. I am 26 years old. The midday sun over the Ravenswick University campus was a physical weight, pressing down on the sea of black mortarboards and stuffy woolen gowns. It was a thick, syrupy heat that made the air shimmer above the manicured lawns of the quad. A brass band, positioned near the Grand Library steps, offered a disjointed, celebratory fanfare that seemed to melt and warp before it reached my ears. The sound was thin, frayed at the edges, like a memory of joy rather than the thing itself. All around me, graduates were laughing, hugging their families, posing for pictures with diplomas held aloft like trophies. Their faces were flushed with a mixture of relief, pride, and the humid July air. It was a perfect tableau of achievement, 1,000 futures launching at once. My own future felt like a closed room. I stood slightly apart from the main throng, a solitary island in the churning ocean of celebration. The heavy fabric of my graduation gown clung to my skin, its synthetic fibers scratching at my arms. I surreptitiously tugged at the right sleeve, pulling the wide, bell-shaped cuff down to my knuckles. Beneath the black polyester, a constellation of pain was blooming on my inner wrist, a brutal, five-fingered galaxy of purple and deep blue, the ghost of a grip. It was a fresh hurt, tender to the touch, and it throbbed in time with the distant, out-of-sync beat of the bass drum. A shadow fell over me, and with it, a familiar, cloying scent of Chanel No. 5 and quiet menace. "Smile, Ivy. You look like you're attending a funeral." Sloane, my stepmother, materialized at my side. Her voice was a low, perfectly modulated whisper, a silken thread designed to sound like concern but woven with steel. She didn't look at me, her gaze sweeping over the crowd as if searching for a photographer from town and country. Everything about her was immaculate. Her crisp, cream-colored linen suit that defied the heat, the single, enormous pearl in each earlobe, the blonde hair swept into a chignon so severe it seemed to pull the skin taut at her temples, erasing any possibility of a genuine expression. Try to look like you belong to us. The Calder name comes with certain presentational obligations. She adjusted the collar of my gown with two perfectly manicured fingers, her touch as cold and impersonal as a marble statue's. Her nail, painted a pale, bloodless pink, grazed the sensitive skin near my collarbone. I flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement. Her lips thinned into something that was shaped like a smile but held no warmth. "Don't embarrass the family." It was her mantra, the closing line to every argument, every clipped command, every quiet moment of cruelty. Don't embarrass the family. The family was a brand, a fortress, and any crack in its facade was a personal affront to her. I was, and had always been, the most unpredictable, and therefore most dangerous, crack. Then, through the crowd, I saw him, my father, Richard Calder, CEO of Harborline Capital, moved through the chaos of graduation day with the same effortless authority he commanded in a boardroom. People parted for him, their congratulations and handshakes seeming to bounce off an invisible shield of purpose. He was handsome in that severe, old money way, with silvering hair, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He carried a large, ostentatious bouquet of white flowers, lilies and roses, so pristine they looked unreal. He reached me, his public smile firmly in place. It was a smile I knew well, the one he used for magazine covers and shareholder meetings. It didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ivy, congratulations," he said, his voice the familiar baritone that could soothe nervous investors and terrify underperforming department heads in a single sentence. "We're all very proud." Sloane placed a proprietary hand on his arm. "Our brilliant girl." I murmured a thank you, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. My father held out the bouquet. The scent of the lilies washed over me, heavy and funereal. As I reached for it, my left hand steadying the heavy bundle of stems wrapped in rustling cellophane, he took my right hand in his. It was meant to be a gesture of fatherly pride, a moment for the imaginary cameras. "A new chapter begins today," he said, his voice booming slightly for the benefit of anyone nearby. His grip was firm, his fingers wrapping around my wrist, and in that moment, the cuff of my gown, weighed down by my movement, slid back by a single, fateful inch. The world seemed to slow down. The disjointed notes of the brass band faded into a low hum. The chatter of the crowd became a distant, meaningless buzz. My father's words hung in the air, but he wasn't looking at my face anymore. His gaze had dropped to our joined hands, to my wrist, to the ugly, violent bloom of the bruise that stood out in stark, shocking relief against my pale skin. And then, his eyes, sharp and trained to spot any anomaly on a balance sheet, noticed something else, something small and unnatural against the deep black of the silk lining inside the cuff, a flicker of silver. I had spent 3 nights stitching it, my fingers clumsy with a needle and thread I hadn't touched in years. Each prick of the needle into the fabric was a small act of defiance, a tiny scream into a void of silence. I used silver thread, hoping it would catch the light, hoping it would be seen. I had stitched 4 simple, damning words. My father's eyes narrowed. He leaned in almost imperceptibly, his CEO's smile frozen on his face, a grotesque mask of paternal pride. He read the words embroidered on the lining of my sleeve. "Stepmother beat me." For a single, suspended heartbeat, the mask slipped. I saw something flicker in his gaze. Not shock, not horror, not even anger. It was something far worse, recognition. It was the flat, dead look of a man confirming a truth he had long chosen to ignore. The light in his eyes didn't just dim, it was extinguished, as if a switch had been flipped, plunging a brightly lit room into absolute darkness. His hand, which had been holding mine, went slack. The bouquet suddenly felt immensely heavy. He let my hand drop as if it had burned him. A swift, dismissive gesture, the white flowers tilted precariously, and a single rose petal detached, drifting slowly to the scorched grass at our feet. He leaned closer, his smile gone, replaced by a tight, rigid set of his jaw. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, a cold, sharp shard of sound meant only for me. "Don't make a scene in front of the press." He straightened up, his public facade snapping back into place so quickly it was dizzying. He gave a curt nod, turned to Sloane, and placed a guiding hand on the small of her back. "We should find our seats for the luncheon," he announced to no one in particular. They walked away, a perfect power couple, leaving me standing alone with the funereal flowers and the throbbing in my wrist. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned to ice water. It wasn't the bruise that hurt anymore. It was the hollow, cavernous space that had just opened up in my chest. It was the chilling, absolute confirmation that my pain was nothing more than an inconvenient variable in my father's life, a potential liability to be managed. I was not his daughter. I was a public relations risk. A sudden flash of light to my left broke the spell. I turned my head. About 30 feet away, another family was celebrating. A father was holding a bulky DSLR camera with a long telephoto lens, aiming it at his own graduating daughter who was laughing and waving her diploma, but for a split second, his lens had swung past her, panning across the scene. He had been capturing the general atmosphere, the background, the context for his daughter's moment of triumph. He had captured our moment, too. He wouldn't know what he had. To him, it would just be another picture of the crowd, a photo of the well-known Richard Calder, his wife, and his daughter. But I knew what that lens had seen. It had seen my father's hand drop. It had seen the light go out of his eyes. It may have even caught the glint of silver thread against black silk. A cold, hard clarity settled over me, displacing the icy shock. I looked down at my diploma, a scroll of thick, creamy paper tied with a Ravenswick blue ribbon, an education, a key, a weapon. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and removed my mortarboard, the square cap feeling flimsy and childish in my hands. I tucked it under my arm with the diploma. I swallowed the lump of tears that had formed in my throat, forcing it down until it became a small, hard stone of resolve in my gut. Sloane had beaten me, my father had abandoned me, but that unknown photographer had given me a gift, a single, unintentional, time-stamped piece of evidence. The first piece: I would not cry. I would not scream. I would not make a scene. Not here, not today. I would do exactly what my father had taught me to do. I would be strategic. I would be patient. I would be meticulous. I would gather my assets, mitigate my risks, and prepare for a hostile takeover. I looked at the back of my father's head as he disappeared into the crowd, Sloane at his side, and I made a silent, solemn vow. I would not repay them with screams or tears. I would repay them with something they understood far better. I would repay them with cold, hard, irrefutable facts. I would bring the truth to light, not in a messy, emotional scene on a university lawn, but in the one place they felt safest, the public record. I would take their most prized possession, the pristine, unimpeachable reputation of the Calder family, and I would burn it to the ground. The Calder house sits on Highmere Hill, a monument to tasteful, sterile wealth. It's less a home and more a corporate statement, a structure of sweeping glass walls and severe modernist lines that seems to have been dropped onto the landscape from a great height. The lawn is its most honest feature, a perfect, pudding green carpet of impossible green, mowed with such relentless precision that it looks less like grass and more like a plush, artificial apology for the coldness of the house itself. From the road, you can see right through the living room to the infinity pool and the hazy skyline of the city beyond. It's a house designed to be looked at, not lived in, a perfect picture, a perfect lie. I remember when the lie began. Sloane arrived 6 months after my mother's funeral, a whirlwind of quiet efficiency and cashmere sweaters. She didn't enter our lives so much as she executed a seamless, bloodless merger. She brought with her a scent of expensive perfume that quickly displaced the faint, lingering smell of my mother's lemon verbena soap, and a daughter, Piper, a girl my age with a perpetually bored expression and a phone that seemed fused to her hand. Sloane's genius was in her subtlety. She never raised her voice. She conquered our home not with force, but with a series of polite, reasonable suggestions that my father, adrift in his grief, readily accepted. She didn't throw out my mother's things. She had them professionally archived for safekeeping. She didn't criticize my father's habits. She gently optimized them. Soon, the dark roast coffee he had brewed every morning for 20 years was replaced by a milder, less acidic blend she preferred. His comfortable, worn leather armchair disappeared, replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable Italian sofa. His schedule, once his own, became a color-coded calendar that Sloane managed with the precision of an air traffic controller. She became the gatekeeper to his life, managing his wallet, his time, and eventually, his thoughts, all from behind the impenetrable fortress of her polite, placid smile. I became an inconvenient relic of the old regime, a ghost at the dinner table. I started taking extra shifts at the campus library, then at a coffee shop downtown, anything to delay the moment I had to walk through the heavy glass door of that house. The hours I worked were a shield, the money I earned was a secret, a growing fund for an escape I hadn't fully planned. I began to keep things, small artifacts of my life. I'd saved the receipt from a late-night dinner of instant noodles, the pay stub from a 16-hour double shift, the bus ticket from a crosstown journey home at 2 a.m. I didn't know why at first, but it felt important to document the reality of my existence, to create a paper trail that proved I was more than the silent, sullen girl Sloane described to her friends. These slips of paper were my proof of life, filed away in a shoebox under my bed. The quiet war escalated in the kitchen one Tuesday evening. The house was filled with the oppressive silence that always descended when my father was on a business trip to Asia. I was making tea, my back to the room. I didn't hear her approach over the sound of the boiling kettle. Her hand clamped down on my forearm, her fingers digging into the muscle with surprising strength. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was soft, almost gentle, a terrifying contrast to the pain radiating up my arm. I tried to pull away. "I'm making tea." "I'm talking about your attitude, the long hours, the deliberate avoidance. Richard is happy. Ivy, for the first time in a long time, he has stability. He has peace." Her grip tightened, her polished nails biting into my skin. "Don't you dare destroy what your father has now." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. Her expression was serene, her eyes calm. It was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. She was threatening me with a smile. She held on for a moment longer, ensuring the lesson was learned, then released me as suddenly as she had grabbed me. "We wouldn't want things to become unpleasant," she said, and walked out, leaving me trembling by the screaming kettle. Piper's cruelty was less subtle but more modern. She wielded social media like a weapon. One afternoon, while I was studying for my finals, my phone buzzed with notifications. A friend had sent me a link. It was a live stream from Piper's immaculately white bedroom. She was sitting on her bed, talking to her thousands of followers. "And so, I try to be compassionate, you know?" she was saying, pouting into the camera. "But it's hard when you have a freeloader living in your house. My mom is a saint, honestly. She took in Richard's daughter, and all she does is mope around and contribute nothing. It's like, get a life, get your own place. Stop leeching off my mom and your dad." My blood ran cold. The comments were flooding in, a torrent of laughing emojis and cruel remarks from her fans. I watched for another minute, paralyzed, as she detailed my supposed laziness, my ingratitude. Then, just as I was about to take a screenshot, she smiled sweetly at the camera. "Oops, gotta go. Mom's calling me for dinner." The stream ended. I went back to her profile. The video was gone, like all her temporary stories. It was designed to vanish before the 24-hour mark, leaving no evidence behind, only the wound. I tried to talk to my father that weekend. I found him in his study, staring at stock market data on a wide, curved monitor. I told him what happened. I showed him the bruise forming on my arm from where Sloane had grabbed me. I explained what Piper had said on her live stream. He didn't turn away from the screen. He listened, his jaw tight. When I finished, he took a deep breath, the kind he took before delivering bad news to an investor. "Ivy," he said, his eyes still on the glowing green and red numbers. "Sloane is protective. She worries about me. I'm sure you're misunderstanding her intent. She hurt me. Dad, Piper called me a parasite in front of thousands of people." He finally swiveled his chair to face me, and his expression was one of profound, weary irritation. "Piper is young. She's impulsive. It was a stupid, childish thing to do. And you cannot let yourself be so sensitive. You're dramatizing everything." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The company is preparing for its initial public offering. This is the single most important moment of my professional life. Everything needs to be perfect. The family needs to project an image of stability. Do you understand? I need you to not create tension right now. I need you to just let it go." And that was it. My pain, my humiliation, was just tension, an inconvenience to be smoothed over, a variable to be controlled in the larger equation of his IPO. He wasn't choosing her over me. He was choosing the company over me. That was the day I stopped talking. It was the day I stopped trying to make him see. You can't reason with a man who has already calculated the acceptable losses. And I was an acceptable loss. So I learned a new skill. I learned to hide. I became an expert in the strategic application of long sleeves. I learned that the right concealer could mute a fresh bruise. I learned to smile politely at the dinner table, a perfect mirror of Sloane's own duplicity. And I started a new file. The shoebox of receipts was retired, I bought a 2 terabyte external hard drive and a high-quality audio recorder. I started backing up my phone data weekly. I recorded the clipped, menacing conversations I overheard. I photographed the bruises. I saved screenshots of Piper's spiteful posts before they could be deleted. Each piece of evidence was a quiet rebellion, a secret I was keeping. I was no longer collecting proof of my own life. I was building a case. I was warehousing the truth, storing it away in a cold, dark, digital vault, waiting for the day when the world would be ready to see it. 3 years is a long time. It's enough time to earn a law degree, pass the bar, and carve out a niche in the one place I knew I had to be. It's enough time to transform from a girl with a secret stitched into her sleeve into a woman with a key to the entire system. I became the head of compliance for Harborline Capital, not because my father appointed me, but because I made it impossible for him not to. A year into my tenure as a junior analyst in the department, I flagged a statistical anomaly in the trading patterns of a mid-level fund manager. It was small, almost insignificant. A series of perfectly timed trades in a small-cap pharmaceutical stock just ahead of a clinical trial announcement. The profits were negligible in the grand scheme of Harborline's portfolio, barely a rounding error, but the pattern was flawless. It was a signature. My superiors told me to drop it. They called it a coincidence, a lucky streak. I ignored them. I worked on my own time, cross-referencing trade logs with phone records and expense reports. I wasn't technically authorized to access. I found the link. The fund manager's brother-in-law was a lab technician at the pharmaceutical company. It was a clean, simple, and utterly damning case of insider trading. I compiled my findings into a 12-page report, stripped of all emotion and speculation, and placed it on my father's desk. He fired the fund manager, and the SEC quietly settled the matter. 2 months later, the head of compliance retired, and my father, seeing not a daughter but a ruthlessly efficient asset who understood the value of discretion, gave me the job. He saw me as a loyal protector of the firm's integrity. He had no idea I was positioning myself to be its executioner. My new position gave me a panoramic view of the company's inner workings, and from my glass-walled office on the 47th floor, I had a perfect view of the rot. Sloan had been installed as the Senior Vice President of Corporate Culture, a nebulous and expensive role that involved approving floral arrangements for the lobby and organizing team-building exercises that were, in reality, lavish parties for her own social circle. Piper, having dropped out of a design program, was given a brand ambassador title in the marketing department. Her primary responsibilities seemed to be managing the company's Instagram account and expensing $1,000 lunches with fashion influencers. They were parasites, elegantly disguised as executives, and I watched them weave their way into the corporate fabric. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. My father was on the verge of his magnum opus, a $1.2 billion merger with Northgate Ridge, a rival private equity fund. This deal would make Harborline a titan, cementing my father's legacy. The due diligence was exhaustive. The scrutiny from regulators and investors, intense, as before. The family, and by extension, the company, needed to be a picture of perfect, unassailable stability. That's when the first threat appeared. I was reviewing quarterly departmental expenditures, a mundane task I never delegated. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets, the endless rows of numbers and cost codes. Under the Employee Welfare and Benefits ledger, a recurring vendor name caught my eye. Willow Bend Retreats. The invoices were for significant amounts. $15,000 here, $25,000 there, all coded to off-site wellness seminars for executive staff. This was Sloan's department. I pulled the dates. The first invoice was dated March 12th. I switched screens, opening the calendar I had meticulously kept for the past 3 years, a private log of my family's activities. On March 12th, Piper had posted a flurry of Instagram stories from a high-end bridal boutique, trying on wedding gowns. The caption read, "Round 1 with Mommy, wedding bells." My pulse quickened. A coincidence. It had to be. I pulled the next invoice from Willow Bend Retreats, April 2nd, amount $22,000. My calendar, April 2nd. Piper had posted a selfie with Sloane, clinking champagne glasses, location tag, Vera Wang, caption, said yes to the dress. Another invoice, April 19th, $18,900. My calendar, April 19th. Piper's fiancé's mother had flown in for a pre-wedding celebration brunch at the plaza, an event Sloane had organized and Piper had documented exhaustively online. The blood in my veins turned to ice. These weren't wellness seminars. This was a wedding slush fund, financed by the company's shareholders. Sloane was laundering Piper's wedding expenses through her departmental budget. And then I saw the signature, the small, arrogant mistake that criminals always make. In half of the invoices, the vendor was misspelled. Not Willowbend, but Willowbend, a single missing L. It was the kind of careless, repeated error that speaks to a lack of oversight, a sense of untouchable confidence. She wasn't even bothering to check the details. Why would she? Who would dare question the CEO's wife? The new compliance monitoring software I had insisted on installing last year was a beautiful, pitiless machine. It used algorithmic analysis to flag irregularities that the human eye might miss. It learned patterns. It hunted for deviations. I ran a query, searching for any and all payments made to vendors named Willowbend or Willowbend. The system pinged. It wasn't just Sloane's department. A small secondary alert triggered from a different cost center, a discretionary subfund under my father's direct control, labeled simply CEO Special Projects. A single payment of $50,000 had been made 2 months ago to Willowbend Retreats. The memo line contained 2 words, Wellness Offsite. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard accounting portals and went straight to the corporate legal database. I ran a search for the business entity, Willowbend Retreats, LLC. It was a real company, registered in Delaware 6 months ago. The filing was public record. I clicked to open the scanned document, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the name listed under sole proprietor and registered agent, Sloane Calder. A wave of cold, triumphant fury washed over me. It was her. It was all her. She had created a shell corporation, given it a harmless-sounding name, and was systematically funneling company money into it to pay for her daughter's extravagant wedding, even managing to pull from my father's own discretionary fund. It was brazen, arrogant, and profoundly stupid. My first instinct was to hit the kill switch. I had the authority. I could freeze the vendor account, block all future payments, and trigger an immediate, high-level internal audit that would bring the entire charade crashing down within hours. I could ruin her, right now, with a single click. But that would be too simple, too quick. An internal audit would be handled quietly. Sloane would be dismissed, the money repaid, and the scandal buried to protect the Northgate Ridge merger. My father would spin it as a regrettable domestic issue, a misunderstanding. Sloane would be a casualty. But the system she exploited, the system of silence and protection that my father had built, would remain intact. No, that wasn't justice. That was just damage control. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes on the LLC filing on my screen. Sloane's name seemed to glow with a faint, malevolent light. I didn't lock the account. I didn't trigger the audit. I didn't alert a single soul. Instead, I set up a new monitoring protocol, a silent, invisible trace on every transaction associated with Willowbend Retreats, LLC. I wanted to see every dollar that flowed in, every invoice that was paid out. I wanted a complete, undeniable map of her greed. I was no longer just an analyst. I was a hunter, and I had just found the tracks of my prey. I would not spring the trap now. I would follow her. I would let her lead me deeper into the forest, let her grow comfortable and careless, until she was so far from safety that there was no possibility of escape. I would track her flow of money as if I were tracking her very breath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hunt began not with a spreadsheet, but with a memory, a flash of light on a hot day 3 years ago. It took me 2 weeks of methodical searching, scrolling through endless public university graduation galleries and geotagged social media posts from July 2022, To find him, the photographer, he was a proud father from New Jersey, and his online gallery was a sea of celebratory images of his daughter, and buried in the middle, in a folder simply labeled Ravenswick Campus Atmosphere. I found it. There were 3 photos, taken in rapid succession: DSC 8841.jpg, DSC 8842 JPG, DSC 8843.jpg. The first showed my father extending the bouquet. The second, 8842, was the moment, the pivot point. My father's head was tilted down, his eyes fixed on my wrist. My hand was dropping away from his. The bouquet was suspended between us. Sloane's profile was visible, a perfect, serene mask. The third photo, 8843, showed my father turning away, his hand on Sloane's back. I downloaded the high-resolution files. I didn't just look at the image. I dissected it. I opened the file properties and extracted the exchangeable image file format data, the metadata. Date time original, 2022-07-18, 12/31-04. Make, Nikon model, D850. Lens model, AFS. Nikkor, 70-200 f2.8. FLEDVR GPS, latitude, 41°G, 18, 14.5, NGPS, longitude, 72°55, 4812W. It was a digital anchor, a precise, unassailable timestamp and location from a neutral third party, confirming the exact second my father saw and ignored the truth. The long-range lens explained the intimacy of the shot. A moment of private devastation captured from 30 feet away. I saved the file. It was the first seed. Then I unlocked the hard drive I had kept in a fireproof safe since college. The drive I'd started after my father told me I was dramatizing things. I sifted through the folders, my own private archive of a war waged in silence. I found the video file, neighbor doorbell Cam Piper 11, 04/2021.mp4. It was grainy, low-resolution footage from our old Highmere Hill neighbor's camera, which he had complained about in a neighborhood association email chain. Piper, drunk, had been ringing his bell at 3 a.m., demanding to know where his son was. I had saved the file from the email chain as proof of her instability. But I wasn't interested in Piper. I was interested in the audio. I scrubbed to the 0215 mark, where Sloane had come out in her silk robe to retrieve her. I isolated the audio track, filtering out the night sounds and Piper's slurring. Sloane's voice was crystal clear, a low, urgent hiss. "Get inside, you fool! Don't let anyone see you like this. What will the neighbors think?" Don't let anyone see. The family mantra. I saved the audio clip. Sloane audio concealment, wave. I kept digging. I found the voicemail. Voicemail Sloane 08.1Cs 2020, M4A. A file I had saved and backed up. A message she had left me after I had been late to a family dinner. She thought she had hung up, but the call had remained connected, capturing the next 30 seconds of her conversation with my father, who had evidently just walked into the room. Her tone shifted from irritation to a cold, advisory capacity. "Richard, you simply cannot approve that transfer. It looks sloppy. We clean it first. We move it through the charitable fund, then to the offshore. It's cleaner. No one will ever connect the two." I stared at the waveform. She wasn't just a cruel stepmother. She was a co-conspirator. She had been advising my father on how to hide money for years. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was a pattern of behavior. This was who she was. With the past secured, I returned to the present. The Willow Bend Retreats LLC file glowed on my monitor. My silent trace was active, logging every transaction. For the next 3 weeks, I watched the money move. It was a beautiful, arrogant, and utterly transparent system. An invoice from Willow Bend Retreats for $25,000 would hit Sloane's department, coded as Executive Wellness. Sloane would personally approve it. The money would transfer from Harborline Capital's operating account to Willowbend's business checking account at a small, regional bank. Then, within 48 hours, the real payments would be made from the Willowbend account. I had subpoena power as head of compliance, but I didn't want to use it and tip my hand. I didn't need to. The vendor names on Piper's endless, giddy social media posts were all I needed. I watched a $15,000 wire transfer leave Willowbend and go directly to Rose Court Bespoke Bridal. That same day, Piper posted a video of herself in her final dress fitting. I watched a $32,000 payment from Willowbend to the Plaza Hotel for event deposit. The next day, Piper posted a screenshot of her confirmation for the rehearsal dinner of the century. I compiled the credit card statements from Willowbend, which I acquired through a simple interbank request, authorized by my own compliance signature. The statements were a roadmap of Piper's wedding planning. The florist, the calligrapher, the custom ice sculpture artist, and every single expense, every dollar, was cross-referenced with two things: an invoice from Willowbend to Harborline, and an Instagram post from Piper. The dates matched perfectly. It was a closed loop of fraud. Now, I needed the human element. The invoices to Harborline weren't submitted by Sloan herself. That was clumsy. They were submitted by two junior-level associates in the corporate culture department. I reviewed their files. Both were young, ambitious, and likely terrified of Sloan. I didn't summon them to my office. That would cause a panic. I sent them both a discreet email from my personal account, asking for an informal chat about workplace environment at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. I met them separately. The first one, a young woman named Sarah, was visibly trembling, convinced she was about to be fired. I bought her a latte and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was one of the Willowbend invoices with her digital signature on the submission form. "I'm not here to get you in trouble, Sarah," I said, my voice low and calm. "I am here, as head of compliance, to protect you. I need you to tell me who told you to submit this, and what they told you it was for." She burst into tears. "Sloan's executive assistant gave it to me," she whispered, her eyes darting around the cafe. "She said it was for a special CEO-approved offsite, and that I should just code it to the conference budget. She told me not to ask questions if I liked my job." The second employee, a young man named Ben, told me almost the exact same story. They said it was a wellness seminar. I knew it looked weird, but it was approved by Sloan. What was I supposed to do? Question the CEO's wife? I had them both sign sworn affidavits detailing the conversations. I assured them that their testimony was sealed and that they were now officially protected under the company's whistleblower policy, a policy I myself had rewritten and strengthened 6 months prior. It was time to assemble the weapon. I couldn't just store this data on the company server, where it could be wiped. I couldn't keep it on a simple hard drive, which could be destroyed. I exported the entire file, the high-resolution graduation photos with their metadata, the audio clips of Sloan, the complete transaction history of Willowbend Retreats LLC, the corresponding Instagram posts from Piper, saved as time-stamped PDFs, the sworn affidavits from the 2 employees, and the Delaware LLC registration for Willowbend, listing Sloan as the sole proprietor. I logged into a secure, third-party legal vault service, one by one. I uploaded the files. With each upload, the system generated a unique cryptographic hash, a digital fingerprint. It then took that hash and published it to a public blockchain, creating an immutable, electronically notarized record. The evidence was now permanent. It could not be altered or deleted. Its existence at this exact moment in time was provably, mathematically, and publicly true. Then, I opened a new document. I began to write. The outline stated, "Write a 26-page report without a single excess adjective." I did exactly that. It was the coldest, most brutal piece of writing I have ever produced. It was not a story. It was a blueprint of a crime. Page 1. Executive Summary of Findings. Page 2. Flowchart of Funds. Harborline Capital to Willowbend Retreats, LLC, to third-party wedding vendors. Page 3 to 15. Appendix A. Transaction by transaction analysis. Invoice. Bank transfer. Correlating social media post. Page 16. Appendix B. Corporate structure. Willow Bend Retreats, LLC. Proprietor, Sloan Calder. Page 17 to 18. Appendix C. Sworn employee testimony, redacted. Page 19. Appendix D. Pattern of concealment, audio file transcripts. Page 25. Appendix G. Conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary duty. Page 26 was the final page. Appendix H. It contained only one thing: the photograph. DSC 8842, JPG. My father's eyes on my wrist. Beneath it, I typed a single line: XEF metadata, 2022-718, 1231-04. Location: Ravenswick University. I hit print. The high-capacity printer outside my office whirred to life. I printed 2 identical, full-color, spiral-bound copies. One copy was for Caden Lee, the managing partner of the independent auditing firm that handled Harborline's books. The second copy was for Eleanor Vance, the independent chairwoman of the Harborline Capital Board of Directors. I placed the 2 thick, heavy reports on my desk. I picked up a pen. I opened each report to the first page, to the line at the bottom, submitted by Ivy Calder, head of compliance. I looked at my hand. It was shaking, a fine tremor from the adrenaline and the weight of what I was about to do, but I held the pen steady. I signed my name. My eyes were firm, and they did not blink. She moved faster than I anticipated. Before the ink on my signature was fully dry, an email from Sloan's executive assistant appeared in my inbox. The subject line was a single, saccharine word: coffee? The body of the message informed me that Sloan would be delighted to treat me to a long-overdue catch-up at the Gilded Bean, a ridiculously overpriced cafe in the lobby of our building, at 4 p.m. that day. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I knew this wasn't a reconciliation. It was an ambush. Sloan never did anything without a strategic objective. She was like a shark, incapable of moving forward without the scent of blood or money in the water. My reports were sealed, sitting in electronically locked folders, scheduled for delivery to the auditors and the chairwoman at a time of my choosing. She couldn't know about them, but she must have sensed a shift in the air, a change in the pressure. A junior accountant might have asked an innocent question about the Willow Bend typo. A name might have been flagged in a routine vendor review. Something had spooked her. At precisely 4 p.m., I walked into the Gilded Bean. Sloan was already there, seated at a secluded corner table, a picture of serene elegance in a silk blouse the color of money. She had a placid smile on her face as I approached. "Ivy, darling, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "I know how busy you are." "Sloan," I replied, my tone perfectly neutral. I sat down, placing my hands on the table. A waiter materialized. "The usual, Mrs. Calder?" Sloan nodded, and he looked at me. "Just water," I said. The opening pleasantries were a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. She asked about my work, complimenting me on the rigor I was bringing to the compliance department. She said my father was so terribly proud, a statement so outrageously false it was almost artistic. I responded with brief, non-committal answers. This was a chess match, and we were both just moving the pawns, testing the defenses before the real attack. Finally, her coffee arrived, a ridiculously complex concoction of foam and caramel. She took a delicate sip, then placed the cup down. From her leather portfolio, she slid a document across the polished marble table. It was bound in a crisp, blue Harborline capital folder. "Your father and I have been talking," she began, her voice dropping into a confidential, conspiratorial tone. "We feel your talent is being underutilized. You've done a remarkable job, and it's time you were rewarded for your loyalty." I opened the folder. The top page read, "Employment Agreement." My name was at the top, followed by a new title: Senior Vice President, Chief Risk Officer. It came with a staggering salary increase, a corner office on the 50th floor, and a seat on 2 minor executive committees. It was a golden staircase, a direct path into the company's inner circle. It was a bribe. "We think you're ready for more responsibility," Sloan continued, watching my face for a reaction. "You'd be reporting directly to the board, a key strategic voice in the firm's future, especially with the Northgate merger on the horizon." I read the text, my eyes scanning the dense legalese. I wasn't looking at the salary or the title. I was looking for the trap. I found it on page 7, section 4, subsection B. It was a single, innocuous-looking sentence buried in a dense paragraph about performance reviews. "The acceptance of this promotion constitutes a full and final waiver of any and all claims, known or unknown, against the company or its executives regarding any past discrepancies, errors, or misallocations within the Employee Welfare and Benefits Program." There it was, the poison pill. She was offering me a crown, but it came with a gag. If I signed this, I would be legally forfeiting my right to ever bring forward what I had discovered about her slush fund. I would be a co-conspirator, bought and paid for with a corner office and a bigger paycheck. I would become a part of the corruption I had sworn to expose. I looked up from the contract and met her gaze. Her smile was brittle, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "You need a home, Ivy," she said softly, the pretense of affection gone, replaced by the blunt force of a transaction. "A real place in this family, in this company. You've been on the outside for too long. I need quiet. I need the past to remain in the past so we can all focus on a profitable future." She leaned forward slightly. "It's a fair trade. We give you a future. You give us your silence." This was the moment, the pivot. She expected me to recoil in horror, to refuse, to make an emotional scene. She was ready for that. She would paint me as ungrateful, unstable, the problem child who couldn't accept a generous offer. I did the one thing she didn't expect. I smiled, a small, cool, professional smile. "This is a very generous offer. Sloan," I said, my voice calm and measured. "It's a lot to consider. I'll need some time to review it properly with my attorney." A flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked. She had expected a fight, not a negotiation. "Of course," she said. "Could you have your assistant send a digital copy to my corporate email address?" I asked, closing the folder and pushing it gently back toward her. "It's easier for my counsel to review that way." She agreed, her smile tightening. She thought I was taking the bait. In her world, asking for a lawyer to review a contract was just the first step in accepting it. She had no idea that the document on the table was just a piece of paper. The real trap, and the real evidence, was in the digital file. An hour later, back in my office with the door locked, the email arrived. The subject was, "Employment Agreement, Confidential." Attached was a single Word document, Ivy Calder Promotion, DocX. I didn't open it on my machine. I powered up a virtual machine, a completely isolated sandbox environment on a dedicated server. It was a digital clean room, a place where I could detonate a bomb without anyone getting hurt. I started a screen recording program, capturing every pixel of the sandboxed desktop in high-definition video. I dragged the Word document into the virtual environment. I double-clicked the file. Word opened. The contract appeared on the screen, and for a split second, a small box flashed in the center of the document. Running macros. I froze the screen recording. There it was, an embedded macro. It was a malicious script, designed to execute the moment the file was opened. I knew exactly what it was programmed to do. It would automatically access the company's internal HR portal using my credentials, which the system would recognize since I was logged in, navigate to the contract approval page, and digitally insert my signature of acceptance. It would then delete itself, leaving no trace. If I had opened this on my own computer, I would have accepted the promotion and the gag order without ever clicking a button. It was an attempt to digitally forge my consent. It was an act of profound, criminal arrogance. I saved the screen recording. Then, I ran a hashing algorithm on the original, unopened docx file, generating its unique digital fingerprint, MD5, 5D8 E789F4B1C2 E4B8 DF4B3D92B1A1C7 9. I now had irrefutable proof of the file's original state, a booby-trapped document, before it had ever been opened. This wasn't just about misappropriated funds anymore, this was attempted fraud. Just as I was saving the final piece of evidence, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news aggregator. A new post had just been published on a popular financial gossip blog. The headline was stark. "The Calder Legacy. Is the heiress at Harborline a fraud?" I clicked the link. The byline was anonymous, but the voice was unmistakably Piper's, filtered through the pen of a hired public relations assassin. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying article. It painted me as a jealous, deceitful schemer. It claimed I had been caught for academic dishonesty at Ravenswick, that I had cheated my way through university, a lie so baseless it was laughable. It was filled with vague, unsubstantiated anecdotes about my difficult and manipulative personality. It was a classic preemptive strike. Discredit the witness before she ever takes the stand. They were trying to muddy the waters, to create a narrative where I was the villain, a vindictive daughter trying to tear down her successful family out of spite. They were playing a public relations game, a game of whispers and innuendo. I read the entire article, my face impassive. I saw the comments starting to pour in, a mix of disbelief and ugly speculation. They expected me to panic, to issue a denial, to get drawn into a messy public he said she said battle. I locked my phone and set it face down on my desk. I would not issue a statement. I would not engage. I would not dignify their lies with a response. They were fighting a battle of words in a public forum. I was fighting a war with notarized evidence in a corporate one. I turned back to my computer and opened my email. I attached the 2 password-protected reports to 2 new messages, one addressed to Caden Lee, the other to Eleanor Vance. I wrote a single sentence in the body of each email. Please review the attached at your earliest convenience. The password will be provided via text message. I hit send. Then I sat back in my chair, the silence of my office a welcome shield. The public could have their drama. Piper could have her blog post. Sloane could have her phantom promotion. They had made their move. Now, it was my turn. I would let them scream into the void. I would answer with silence, and let the quiet, inexorable algorithm of truth run its course. The day was orchestrated for a public audience. Piper, in her element, had invited a film crew from a vapid but popular online entertainment show to document what she had relentlessly branded on social media as her Princess Day, the Rose Court Boutique, a temple of white silk and ridiculously expensive lace, had been closed to the public just for her, through the lens of her own live stream. The world saw a fantasy. Piper, sipping champagne, surrounded by a mountain of tulle, her laughter echoing artificially in the hushed, dove-gray room. "It's just a dream come true," she gushed to the camera, her voice practiced and emotional. "My mother, Sloane, has made this the most magical day of my life." At that precise moment, 10:15, on a Tuesday, I was in my office on the 47th floor, watching a different screen, not Piper's live stream, but my own compliance dashboard. I had 2 secure messages open. The first, to Caden Lee, the lead partner at the external auditing firm, was simple. "The file is live, password as discussed, proceed." The second, to my own internal audit team, was even simpler. "Execute Code Red Audit Protocol 7. Vendor, Willowbend. All associated accounts, effective immediately." I hit enter. At 10:02 a.m., as Piper was dramatically asking her followers to vote on which veil made her look more iconic, Caden Lee and 3 of his most carnivorous-looking forensic accountants stepped out of the express elevator into the executive lobby of Harborline Capital. Our receptionist, accustomed to placid investment bankers, looked up in alarm. "We're here for an unscheduled audit, requested by compliance," Lee said. not breaking his stride. He and his team bypassed her desk and walked directly toward the accounting department. Simultaneously, 2 floors below, my internal audit team leader locked his office door and initiated the protocol. It was a beautiful, destructive piece of code I had designed myself. With a single command, the system slammed shut like a steel trap. Every single invoice from Willow Bend Retreats and Wilo Bend, whether pending or approved, was instantly frozen. A new payment for $40,000, which Sloan had approved just an hour earlier for floral design services, was stopped dead. The vendor account itself was locked. The corporate credit card issued to Willow Bend Retreats LLC, the very card Piper had in her Chanel handbag at that moment, was deactivated. At 10:03 a.m., Piper's live stream focused on her face, glowing with feigned humility. "I just want to thank my entire family for being so supportive," she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear. "My father, of course, and even my sister, Ivy. I know she's Ivy," she giggled. "But she works so hard, and I know, deep down, she wishes me nothing but the best." As the words, "wishes me nothing but the best," were broadcast to her 30,000 followers, a pre-scheduled, automated email was sent from a secure third-party server. The recipient list was Harborline Board of Directors DL. It included every independent member of the board. The subject: urgent and confidential. Notification of internal investigation, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of corporate funds. Attached were 3 files. The first was my 26-page report. The second was the high-definition video recording of me opening the booby-trapped employment contract from Sloan. The third was the hashed, time-stamped log of the fraudulent Wilo Bend invoices. A separate encrypted text message delivered the password to each board member's personal phone. In her office, Sloan was likely admiring her own handiwork, watching her daughter's saccharine performance on a second monitor. Her email would have chimed. She would have seen the subject line. She would have seen the sender, Ivy Calder. The panic must have been immediate and absolute. She would have grabbed her phone, her fingers no doubt flying to my father's contact. The call would not have gone through. I knew my father's schedule better than she did. At 10:05 a.m., he was 2 hours into a 7-hour flight to London to meet with the Northgate Ridge investors. He was at 35,000 feet, his phone off, blissfully unreachable. Sloan would have dialed again, and again. The calls would go straight to voicemail. She was alone. The auditors were in the building. The board had the evidence, and her husband was in the sky. Back at the Rose Court boutique, the performance was reaching its crescendo. Piper had finally chosen her dress, a monstrously large ball gown. She spun for the cameras, her face a mask of manufactured joy. "This is it. This is the one." She and her entourage, Sloan's personal assistant, 2 bridesmaids, and the fawning media crew, floated to the antique front desk. The boutique manager, a woman with a severe haircut and a polite, icy smile, was waiting. "It's absolutely divine on you, Ms. Calder," the manager said. "Shall we process the final deposit?" "Of course," Piper said, waving her hand dismissively, her eyes still on the camera. "Just put it on the account. My mother has it all arranged." She pulled the platinum corporate card from her wallet and handed it over, a gesture of pure, unadulterated entitlement. The manager swiped the card. Her polite smile faltered. She swiped it again. A small, red light blinked on the terminal. Transaction failed. Account frozen. "That's odd," the manager said, her politeness cracking. "What's wrong?" Piper asked, her smile tightening. The camera was still rolling, capturing this authentic behind-the-scenes moment. "Just run it again. The machine is probably just old." "I assure you, Ms. Calder, our systems are state-of-the-art," the manager replied, her voice now as cold as the marble countertop. She swiped it a third time. Declined. "Do not honor. Account suspended." "This is ridiculous," Piper snapped, her princess facade dissolving. "Do you know who my father is? That's a Harborline Capital account." I'm sure it is, the manager said. She had dealt with entitled brides before. She turned her monitor discreetly toward Piper, wanting this to be over. The payment is not being accepted. The issuing bank has flagged the account as suspended, pending investigation. Piper leaned in, her face contorting with a confusion she couldn't hide from the cameras. She squinted at the screen, at the customer billing profile, and there, illuminated in the stark, unfriendly font of the accounting software, was the name of the payer, the name of the account she had been told to use for all her wedding expenses. Payer, Willow Bend Retreats, LLC. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the exact beautiful moment that the smile died, replaced by a blank, chilling, and utterly public wave of comprehension. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it was over. The emergency board meeting was convened in the Glacier Room on the 50th floor. It was a sterile glass box of a room, dominated by a 20-foot-long table of polished black granite that reflected the grim faces of the people seated around it. The only sounds were the faint, rhythmic ticking of a minimalist wall clock, the quiet hum of the climate control system, and the occasional, sharp scrape of a leather chair against the hardwood floor. Each sound was amplified by the tension, each tick of the clock a hammer blow counting down the final seconds of Sloane's career. Sloane was already there when I arrived, seated next to her personal lawyer. She looked smaller in this setting, stripped of her social armor. Her face was a pale, rigid mask, but a muscle twitching in her jaw betrayed the panic beneath. Across the table sat Eleanor Vance, the independent chairwoman, her face impassive and unreadable. The rest of the independent directors were present, along with Caden Lee, the lead auditor, and Marcus Thorne, Harborline's general counsel. A seat had been left for me, directly opposite Sloane. I took my seat in silence. I placed my laptop on the table and did not open it. I met Sloane's gaze across the polished abyss of the table. Her eyes were filled with a venomous, desperate hatred. I felt nothing. Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, cleared his throat. This emergency session of the board has been called to address a matter of urgent and critical importance, brought to our attention by the head of compliance. Mr. Lee will begin. Caden Lee, the auditor, didn't bother with pleasantries. He nodded to an assistant, and the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The first slide was stark, black text on a white background. Title: Preliminary Audit Findings, Vendor Code 78B. Willow Bend Retreats, LLC. Subtitle: Review of Potential Conflict of Interest and Misappropriation Pathways. Our review, initiated this morning, Lee began, his voice a flat, unemotional drone, has confirmed that 100% of payments from Harborline Capital to the entity Willow Bend Retreats were subsequently dispersed to third-party vendors whose services align with the planning and execution of a private wedding, not corporate wellness events. He clicked to the next slide. It was a flowchart, a damning, undeniable map of the money trail, with arrows leading from the Harborline logo to the Willow Bend LLC box, and then branching out to the logos of Rose Court Bridal, the Plaza Hotel, and a dozen other luxury vendors. Sloane's lawyer leaned in and whispered in her ear. Sloane straightened up, her voice sharp and brittle. This is a gross mischaracterization. There has been a simple administrative error. A junior-level employee must have mistakenly mixed up the cost codes for my daughter's wedding planning account and the corporate wellness account. It's a regrettable, but ultimately harmless, clerical mistake. Eleanor Vance looked at her, her expression unchanged. A clerical mistake that totals, to date, $472,000? The money will be repaid immediately, of course, Sloane said quickly. It was an oversight, an unfortunate series of coincidences. Marcus Thorne looked at me and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single flash drive, which I handed to the IT assistant at the end of the room. Mr. Thorne, Lee said, his voice cutting through Sloane's excuses. The issue of intent is perhaps relevant here. Thorne nodded. If I could direct the board's attention to the screen. The flowchart disappeared, replaced by a video player, It showed a recording of a computer desktop. A mouse cursor moved, dragging a Word document into the window. Ivy Calder Promotion, Doc X. Sloane went rigid. Her lawyer stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. The video showed the document being opened. It showed the contract, and for 3 damning high-definition seconds, it showed the pop-up box in the center of the screen, running macros. This file was sent by Mrs. Calder to Ms. Calder yesterday afternoon, Thorne stated calmly. It contained a macro designed to digitally execute the contract on Ms. Calder's behalf, without her consent. That contract, I should add, contained a clause waiving all rights to pursue claims related to past clerical mistakes in the benefits program. A heavy silence fell over the room. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, each second an accusation. Sloane's clerical error defense had just been vaporized. This was not an accident. This was a cover-up, a clumsy, arrogant, and now, very public one. Ms. Calder, Eleanor Vance said, her gaze shifting to me. Your presentation. I stood up. I did not walk to the front of the room. I remained at my seat. I spoke for precisely 10 minutes. I used no adjectives. I offered no emotional narrative. I was the head of compliance delivering a report. On March 12th, a payment of $15,000 was approved for a wellness seminar. On that same day, funds were dispersed from Willowbend to a bridal boutique. At 2:15 p.m., Piper Calder posted a social media update from that boutique. I continued, my voice steady and even. I was a human timeline. I connected the money to the dates to the social media posts, the posts to the fraudulent invoices. I laid out the facts, one after another, like bricks in a wall. I presented the sworn testimony of the junior employees who were told to not ask questions. I concluded by presenting the hash-verified, unalterable evidence of the booby-trapped contract. When I was finished, I said, that concludes my report on the financial and fraudulent aspects of this case. I sat down. The silence that followed was different. It was heavier, colder. The board members looked from me to Sloane, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Sloane's lawyer was scribbling furiously on a legal pad. Sloane herself just stared at me, her mask of composure finally crumbling, revealing the raw, ugly fury beneath. Then Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman, spoke. She didn't look at Sloane. She didn't look at the lawyers or the auditors. She looked directly at me. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. She asked a single question, a question that had nothing to do with money or macros or cost codes. Did anyone in this room lay a hand on this girl? The air in the room seemed to crystallize. The question hung there, a shocking, brutal departure from the corporate script. Sloane's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Her lawyer stopped writing. Every person at the table turned to look at me, then at Sloane, then back at me. The ticking clock was the only sound in the universe. I didn't answer. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back an inch. I raised my right arm and placed it on the table, and with my left hand, I pulled back the cuff of my silk blouse, exposing my wrist. At the same moment, I clicked the wireless mouse in front of me. The slide on the screen changed. It was no longer a spreadsheet or a legal document. It was a photograph. DSC 8842.jpg. My father's eyes on my wrist, the falling bouquet, my younger, more broken face. And there, visible in the high-resolution image, was the dark, ugly bruise. I clicked the mouse again. The image on the screen zoomed in. A tight, forensic close-up on the inside cuff of the graduation gown's sleeve. The silver thread shimmered, each tiny, hand-sewn stitch clear and undeniable. Stepmother beat me. I clicked one last time. The image was replaced by stark, white text. File, DSC 08842.jpg. Date time. Original, 2022-07-18, 12/31/04 GPS. Latitude, 41°18, 1455. NGPS longitude, 72 to 55, 48, 12. W source, neutral, third party. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The clock had stopped ticking. My heart had stopped pounding. There was only the cold, hard, metadata-verified truth glowing on the screen. Marcus Thorne, the general counsel, looked at the screen, then at Sloane's ashen face, and then at Eleanor Vance. He gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. "We are halting the Northgate merger, effective immediately," he said, his voice resonating with the finality of a judge's gavel. "We are commissioning a fully independent, external investigation, and this entire file is being turned over to the district attorney's office." He arrived 2 hours after the meeting had adjourned. The board members, the lawyers, and the auditors had long since departed, leaving a wake of disturbed silence and half-empty water glasses. I had remained in the glacier room, a solitary figure at the long, black table, watching the city lights begin to glitter in the twilight. I wasn't waiting for him, not really. I was simply letting the silence settle, letting the reality of what had just happened sink into the cold glass walls of the room. The door opened with a soft, hydraulic hiss. He stepped inside, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. The man who had boarded the flight to London that morning was Richard Calder, CEO, a titan of industry. The man who stood before me now was just a father, old and broken. The 2 hours it had taken his private jet to turn around and fly back had aged him a decade. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and his face was the color of ash. The easy authority he always carried was gone, replaced by a deep, cavernous exhaustion. He didn't speak. He walked slowly to the table and sank into the chair that Eleanor Vance had occupied, the seat of judgment. He stared at the blank screen at the end of the room, as if he could still see the ghosts of the evidence that had been presented there. The ticking of the clock, which had been a torment during the meeting, now seemed to be measuring the slow, painful beats of his own heart. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were cloudy with a pain I had never seen before. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a piece of his personal stationery. Folded and refolded so many times the creases were soft and gray. It was wrinkled, as if it had been clenched in a fist. He slid it across the polished surface of the table. It stopped a few inches from my hand. "I wrote this," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "The day of your graduation. I wrote it in the car on the way to the luncheon." He paused, swallowing hard, and then I put it back in my pocket. I never sent it. I looked at the crumpled letter, then back at him. I didn't touch it. "I was a coward," he whispered, the admission costing him more than any financial loss ever could. I picked up the letter. The paper was soft, almost like fabric, from being handled so many times. I unfolded it carefully. His handwriting, usually a strong, decisive script, was rushed and uneven. Ivy. There are no words to excuse what happened today. I know what I saw, and I did nothing. I tell myself it's for the good of the company. The IPO is weeks away. Any hint of instability, any breath of scandal, could undo years of work. I tell myself I am protecting thousands of jobs, my legacy, your future. I tell myself that this is what it means to be a leader, to make the hard, ugly choices for the greater good. But as I write this, I know it is all a lie. I am not protecting the company. I am protecting myself. I am choosing a number on a stock ticker over my own daughter. I am a coward, and I am a fool. I have failed you, and I am so sorry. I hope one day you can forgive me. Dad. I read it twice. The words were a perfect, devastating summary of his character. A moment of clarity, a flash of conscience, immediately subsumed by a lifetime of calculated self-interest. He had known, for 3 years, he had known the truth, and he had kept this letter in his pocket, a secret token of a guilt he was unwilling to act upon. I folded the letter carefully along its original, worn creases. I looked up at him. The cavernous space in my chest, the one that had opened up on that graduation lawn, ached with a dull, ancient pain. "And the bruise?" I asked, my voice quiet. He flinched, as if the word itself was a physical blow. He broke eye contact, his gaze falling to the reflective surface of the table. "I saw it," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "And I was scared." "Scared of her?" I asked. "Or scared of what the press would say?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The letter had already answered for him. We sat in silence for another long minute, the unspoken truths filling the space between us. He had seen, he had understood, and he had made a choice. He had chosen the company. I reached into my briefcase again and took out a single, stapled document. It was a copy of the employment contract Sloan had offered me. I slid it across the table to him, to the exact spot where his unsent letter had been. "She offered me this yesterday," I said, "as a trade for my silence." He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. He read the new title, the salary. He flipped to page 7, to the waiver clause I had highlighted. Then he flipped to the final page I had attached, a screenshot of the running macros, pop-up, with a technical explanation from my IT security team detailing what the malicious code was designed to do. His name, Richard Calder, was not on the document, but Sloane's name was there, a glittering, venomous presence in the footer of every page. He made a sound, a sharp, ragged intake of breath, like a man who had been punched in the gut. He dropped the papers on the table as if they were on fire. He looked around the empty glass-walled room, his eyes wide and frantic, like a trapped animal searching for an escape that wasn't there. He had built this room. It was the apex of his empire, and now it was his cage. He looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw not just guilt or pain, but fear. He was afraid of me. From the corner of the table, Marcus Thorne, who had re-entered the room silently, pushed a single document and a pen toward my father. "Richard," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "it's time." My father stared at the paper. The heading was clear: Notice of immediate and indefinite administrative leave. The names on the document were Sloan Calder and Piper Calder. It was a suspension pending termination, a corporate execution. He picked up the pen. He uncapped it. He signed his name at the bottom. His signature, usually so bold, was just a faint, spidery scratch. He had just amputated a part of his own life. He pushed the signed document away and slumped back in his chair, a king who had just willingly signed his own abdication. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "Do you want to run the HR meeting tomorrow?" he asked. The question was a surrender, a concession, an offering. He was handing me the keys to the kingdom I had just brought to its knees. I thought about it for a beat: the corner office, the power, the ability to remake the company he had built, to cleanse it of the rot he had allowed to fester. It was everything I had fought for, the spoils of war. I shook my head. "No," I said. He looked confused. "Then what is it you want, Ivy?" I reached across the table and picked up the signed suspension notice. I slid it into a folder with a copy of my 26-page report. This was the record, the official, undeniable, permanent truth. "I just wanted this," I said, my voice clear and steady, without a trace of anger or triumph. I just wanted the truth to be entered into the minutes. The company town hall was held in the atrium, a vast 4-story cathedral of glass and steel. It was designed to impress, to project an image of transparency and scale. Today, it felt like an arena. Hundreds of employees filled the tiered seating and stood along the glass balconies of the upper floors, their faces a mosaic of confusion, anxiety, and morbid curiosity. 3 large screens flanked a temporary stage, and on them, the live stream feed showed the number of online viewers, shareholders, journalists, the entire financial world, climbing into the thousands. The air hummed with the nervous energy of 1,000 whispered conversations. My father walked onto the stage alone. He didn't walk to the central podium but stood to the side, a small, solitary figure against the massive Harborline Capital logo projected behind him. The teleprompters were dark. He was speaking without a script. When he began, his voice, usually so commanding, was a low, hoarse rasp, amplified by the sound system until it filled every corner of the vast space. "Good morning," he started, and the words seemed to catch in his throat. He cleared it and tried again. "This morning, I am not speaking to you as your CEO. I am speaking to you as a man who has made a profound and inexcusable error in judgment." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. "For too long," he continued, his eyes scanning the faces before him, "I have allowed a culture of insulation to exist at the highest levels of this company. I prioritize stability over scrutiny, silence over truth. This was a failure of leadership, my failure." He took a deep breath. As a direct result of this failure, a significant conflict of interest and misappropriation of corporate funds occurred within the executive ranks. This was not a clerical error, it was a deliberate deception, and it happened under my watch. The murmurs grew louder. People were glancing at each other, their phones held low in their laps. Therefore, effective immediately, the proposed merger with Northgate Ridge is terminated. A collective gasp went through the atrium. The deal he had spent 2 years building, the pinnacle of his career, was gone. He had just vaporized $1 billion of potential value in a single sentence. "Furthermore," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority, "the board has commissioned a fully independent, external investigation into all executive expenses and discretionary funds, going back 5 years. There will be complete transparency, and today, we are enacting a new, ironclad whistleblower protection policy. The Calder Policy, it will be called. It will provide anonymous reporting channels, legal protection, and substantial financial rewards for any employee who brings forward evidence of misconduct at any level, without fear of reprisal. This company will be a safe place to tell the truth. I give you my word." He paused, and the weight of that promise hung in the air. Then, he turned and looked directly at me, where I sat in the front row. "To that end," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I have invited our head of compliance, who brought this matter to light, to address you, Ivy Calder." Every head in the atrium swiveled to face me. The live stream camera zoomed in, a path cleared, and I walked the few steps onto the stage. I felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on me, 1,000 questions in the air. I walked past my father, not looking at him, and stood at the central podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the glowing red lights of the cameras. The silence was absolute. I had been given 5 minutes. I would need less than 1. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I have 5 statements to make." I took a breath, letting the anticipation build. First, a shell corporation, Willowbend Retreats LLC, was established by a senior executive for the sole purpose of defrauding this company. Second, over the past 6 months, this entity was used to funnel nearly $500,000 of shareholder money to pay for personal, non-business-related expenses. Third, when this activity was discovered, that same executive attempted to conceal the fraud by offering a promotion in exchange for a contractual agreement of silence, delivered via a file containing malicious code. Fourth, this pattern of behavior, of corruption and concealment, was not limited to financial matters. I paused, letting the implications of that sentence land. Then, I delivered the final, brutal blow. Fifth, the first act of this corruption was not a false invoice. It was an act of violence, and the first attempt to conceal it was not a forged contract, but a father's silence. I pressed the button on the podium. The massive screens behind me, which had been showing my face, flickered and changed. They now showed a single, massive, high-resolution image, DSC 8842, JPG, a close-up, a tight, forensic shot of the black silk lining of a sleeve. The silver thread of my embroidery seemed to gleam under the stage lights, the words stark and undeniable for everyone to see. "Stepmother beat me." The silence in the atrium broke. It wasn't a noise, but the opposite. A sudden, collective intake of breath. A universal gasp that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. It felt as if the air itself had lost its weight, as if gravity had momentarily ceased to exist. For a full 10 seconds, there was no sound at all, only the image, glowing on 3 giant screens, a secret scream now made public. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A side door, normally used by catering staff, opened. 2 uniformed security guards stepped through, their faces impassive. They were followed by Sloane and Piper. They had clearly been held in a nearby office, forced to watch the entire town hall. Sloane's face was a mask of incandescent fury. Piper was openly weeping, her face puffy and red. The security guards flanked them, their presence a firm, unyielding barrier. They began to walk them toward the main exit. As they passed through the edge of the crowd, the spell of silence broke. One employee raised their phone, its flash a small, defiant star in the dim light. Then another, and another. Within seconds, a river of light was flowing through the atrium. 100 phone cameras tracking the slow, humiliating exit of the 2 women. It was a walk of shame, illuminated by the very technology of public scrutiny they had once tried to weaponize. They didn't look back. The glass doors slid open, and they were gone. The room erupted in a low, rumbling murmur. I remained at the podium, watching the doors slide shut. My father stood frozen on the stage, a statue of a man, watching the public implosion of the life he had built. A hand went up in the 3rd row. It was a young woman, an analyst from the tech division. My father's staff tried to shut her down, but I held up my hand. "Yes," I said into the microphone. Her voice was shaking, but clear. "Thank you," she said, her voice amplified throughout the room. "Thank you for not staying silent." The murmurs in the room solidified into a wave of applause, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for the idea that things could be different. I looked away from the crowd, away from my father, and directly into the lens of the main live stream camera. I knew thousands of people were watching. Investors, competitors, employees in our global offices. I was no longer speaking to the room. I was speaking to the record. "We don't get ahead," I said, my voice low and firm, a hammer blow driving home the final nail. By hiding someone else's pain. I did not wait for the applause to fade. I turned from the podium. The 3 giant, glowing images of my stitched confessions searing themselves onto the back of my eyelids. The sound of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of noise that seemed to push me forward as I walked off the stage. The heat of the spotlights felt like a fever on my skin. I passed my father, who remained a statue of gray-suited grief, his eyes fixed on some distant, internal horizon of his own making. I didn't look at him. My part in his story was over. I stepped from the bright, chaotic stage into the cool, silent throat of a long service corridor. The noise of the atrium was instantly muffled, reduced to a dull, oceanic roar behind me. Here, the world was different. The floor was polished concrete. The walls were an anonymous off-white, and the only light came from cold, recessed fluorescent strips overhead. My heels clicked with a sharp, solitary rhythm against the floor, a sound that was entirely my own. As I walked, I began a small, private ritual. I reached across with my left hand and took the cuff of my right sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, I began to fold it back. One fold, neat and precise, covering the wrist bone. A second fold, bringing the edge to the middle of my forearm. I kept going, the movement methodical, unhurried. The fine silk of the blouse was cool against my skin. I rolled the sleeve all the way up to my elbow, exposing the pale, unblemished skin of my arm. There were no marks, no bruises, no ghosts. The evidence of the past was no longer written on my body. It was now a permanent, notarized entry in the public record, where it belonged. I emerged from the corridor into the hushed, cavernous space of the executive lobby. It was empty. a world away from the pandemonium in the atrium. My father was there, standing by the massive glass walls that overlook the city, a lonely silhouette against the afternoon sky. He must have followed me through a different exit. He heard my footsteps and turned. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: shame, regret, a desperate, pleading hope. He opened his mouth to speak, the first syllable of my name forming on his lips. Ivy. But the sound died there. No words came. What could he possibly say? What apology could ever span the chasm of those 3 years of calculated silence? The moment stretched, filled with the vast emptiness of everything he had failed to do, everything he had failed to be. He closed his mouth, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. His shoulders slumped. He lowered his head, a gesture of complete and final surrender. I walked toward him, my footsteps echoing in the large, empty space. I stopped a few feet away. I was still holding the crumpled, unsent letter he had written on my graduation day. I held it out to him. His eyes lifted, and he looked at the letter in my hand, then back at my face. "Send this to the right person this time," I said, my voice quiet but clear, stripped of any anger or accusation. It was simply a statement of fact. He took the letter from my hand, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. The paper felt like a relic, an artifact from a different life. "Send it to yourself," I finished. His hand closed around the letter, crushing the fragile paper in his fist. He gave a single, sharp nod, his eyes still fixed on the floor. It was his penance now, his burden to carry. I had delivered the truth. His own absolution was a journey he would have to take alone. As if on cue, the massive, automated glass doors at the far end of the lobby slid open, admitting a senior security officer. A gust of cool, damp wind swirled into the climate-controlled stillness of the building, carrying with it the distant sound of city traffic and the scent of rain on hot pavement. The wind billowed through the lobby, a clean, fresh breath in a place that had held only stale secrets. It felt like the building itself was finally exhaling. In the sudden quiet, my phone vibrated in my pocket, a low, insistent buzz. I pulled it out. The screen was lit with a notification from an encrypted messaging app. From Office of the Chair, National Board of Corporate Auditors. Message: Ms. Calder, following recent events, the board formally invites you to join its newly formed Independent Committee on Corporate Ethics and Governance. Your perspective would be invaluable. Please advise on your availability to discuss. I stared at the message. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was a door opening into a world where my skills, honed in a secret war, could be used to build something better. It was a future I had earned, not with tears, but with metadata and a steady resolve. I pressed my thumb to the screen, silencing the phone's future vibrations, and slipped it back into my pocket. The invitation could wait. For the first time in a long time, I was not in a hurry. I looked up, high in the corner. Nestled where the glass wall met the ceiling was a small, black, hemispheric security camera. A single, unblinking eye, silently recording everything. It had recorded my father's defeat. It had recorded my final instruction to him. It was the building's memory, a passive, impartial witness. I looked directly into its dark lens, and I smiled. It wasn't a large smile, not one of happiness or triumph. It was a small, quiet, knowing smile of a person who had finally balanced the books, a person who had nothing left to hide. The doors to the atrium burst open behind me, and the roar of the crowd, now mingled with the frantic shouts of journalists, flooded into the lobby. A reporter, a woman with a microphone thrust forward like a weapon, caught sight of me. "Ms. Calder," she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. "Ivy, do you have any further comment?" I turned my head slightly, not to face her, but to let my voice carry back into the chaos. I didn't raise my voice. I let the question hang in the air for a single, perfect beat. Then, I gave them my final statement, my advice, my command. Take off the sleeve. Cut to black, end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. And for extra support, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by more people. Your support means the world.